If I were to ask you to turn to the love chapter in the Bible, I don't think any of you really would have any trouble finding it, would you? 1 Corinthians 13 has become so familiar to all of us as that chapter that deals with love, what love is, and what it's like, and how it expresses itself in the lives of people. And almost every young preacher, as he's coming along somewhere along the line, is bound to give a sermon on 1 Corinthians 13, on the love chapter, and it forms the focus of it. And by the time you get to be an old minister like me, you've generally done it several times in your career. It's such an important aspect of those things pertaining to the Christian way of life. But did you ever notice anything peculiar about that 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians? As you read through the description of the characteristics of love, or as the King James translators chose to translate it, charity. There is something rather unusual about it as you go along and look at the things that you find here, because it lists about 15 different sorts of descriptions of charity, the Greek word agape, which some of us like to translate love. And in all of these, there is no mention of feelings or emotion or affection. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way particularly, but just take a look at what you find there. The first thing listed is long-suffering. Interesting expression, love suffers long. Basically what it means is the word suffer in Old King James English meant to allow or to permit. As Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me. Permit the little children. Suffrage or permission or allowance is what is spoken of here, so that God permits long, or is long permitting, long allowing. It's an expression which all of us understand as basically meaning patience, but it's not a feeling. It's just basically a way of treating people, that you are patient with them, long-suffering, long-permitting. The second thing that is listed is kind. Now, kindness is not really a feeling or an emotion. It's a way of treating people. It's the sort of decisions you make when you're dealing with people. You make decisions that are kind as opposed to decisions that are unkind in the way you treat people. Love, we're told, is not envious. Now, envy could be called an emotion, couldn't it? But to be not envious is a lack of emotion. It's not you're not feeling an envy or a jealousy toward another person. You are content to allow that person to have what is theirs and not worry about it so much. Makes no parade of itself, vaunts not itself. This is not a particular emotion. It's a status or the attitude of being humble, of a sound self-image that does not either deprecate oneself unduly or exalt oneself unduly. Not puffed up, not arrogant, behaves itself in a seemly fashion, which means decorous, a way that people could watch how you behave and not criticize your demeanor. Not self-willed, not easily provoked. Love, we're told, thinks no evil. In other words, isn't sitting around trying to figure out what's wrong with everybody or everything. It doesn't take any pleasure in iniquity. It rejoices rather in the truth. Love bears all, hopes all, endures all, and love never fails. Now that basically is the list. These are the things that are there, but these are not things that have to do with feelings, with emotions, with affection for another human being. Think about it. Most of us, if we thought in terms of, well, I wish I loved God more, what we really are talking about is a need that we have to feel. I want to feel something. I want to have this. What is it that we're looking for when we say we want to feel? Is it that little prickling feeling that comes from the shot of adrenaline that we get from time to time? Is it a tightening of the stomach muscles that we get when we see someone who is particularly attractive to us and we hope to marry? Is it little sweaty palms? What is it that we're looking for when we talk about feeling? Well, it's an emotion. It's something that we would like to have. But now, I think we need to understand that the King James translators, when they came along here, chose to translate this charity when they knew the meaning of the word love. And I think they did so because the Greek word agape and the description of agape that we find here in this particular chapter is not well represented by our word love. For our word love is very tightly associated with affection and with feelings and with emotions for other people. And they read through this and saw, now wait a minute, what we're dealing with here is something more than that, something slightly other than that. Now, charity, as Christian writers have looked at it down through the years, is not a feeling. It is a virtue. Well, okay. What's a virtue? What do we mean by a virtue? Well, a virtue has to do with the kind of person you are. Now, the law of God deals with about three major areas, I guess, that concern us as human beings. It deals with the way you and I will relate to one another, and it will deal with the way that you as a person relate to God, and it will also deal, though, with the way you as a person relate to yourself. In other words, I think C.S. Lewis, when he was drawing his analogy back in the 40s, in World War II, liked to use the idea of a convoy that's out here at sea. And so he said some people seem to have the idea that it's enough for all these ships to be going along in order and none of them to be straying off into the night and none of them running into the other one or cutting afoul of the other one or damaging the other ships. That it doesn't matter so much what goes on in my ship as long as I just don't run into anybody else's ship. But he went on to point out that if you're tearing up the cargo, burning the cargo, throwing the cargo over the side, it really does matter very much what's going on in your own ship. Well, now, what Christian writers have often referred to as the 7 virtues are things that have to do with the kind of people we are. And it's only manifested as we come into contact with other people, and as we deal with other people, we may express that virtue to them. But it is an internal matter inside of us. Now, a single charitable act does not make you a charitable person, does it? Well, Paul put it this way: though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor and have not charity, it profits me nothing. That's an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor and I have not charity, it profits me nothing. Now, how am I to understand this? Well, Mr. Armstrong and I occasionally play golf together, and he is a lot better golfer than I am. In fact, he gives me a stroke and a half consistently per hole and still beats me playing golf. So he's, most of the time, a fairer relationship would be 2 strokes a hole. So he plays a lot better game of golf than I do. But Mr. Armstrong has never in his life had a hole-in-one. Neither have I. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that one of these days, down here at Emerald Bay or maybe somewhere else we're playing golf together, I'm going to tee up on this hole that goes across a little stem of the lake going in there. And I'm going to haul off with my 5-iron and lurch at the ball and hit it well, and it's going to sail over the green and roll in the cup. It's not inconceivable that I could actually get a hole-in-one before he does. Will that make me a better golfer than he is? One lucky shot, one good shot, one time in my life when I get the whole thing put together. No, because I'll go over to the next hole, tee up my ball, and hit it straight into the lake, in all likelihood. That's not the sort of hole-in-one that most golfers have in mind along the way. One good shot doesn't make you a good golfer, any more than one charitable act makes you a charitable person. Nor do feeling good about your tennis game make you a better tennis player. Oh, it may keep you from getting negative and being careless and so forth. And if you actually are in fine fettle on a given morning, you're likely to play a better game. But just sitting around thinking you're a better tennis player isn't going to make you a better tennis player. Christian love, as a virtue, has to do not only with specific acts, but with the kind of person you are, and it is seen by a great many of the acts that we do. Christian love, otherwise called charity or agape, is not a matter of emotions, it's not a matter of feelings, and it's not a matter of affections. Now, another way of looking at this, perhaps you can understand it this way. You are fond of and have affection for probably quite a few people, don't you? You can cast your eye about the room that we're in here and say, yeah, I'm fond of him, and yeah, I have a great deal of affection for him. But you don't have that same kind of affection for other people, do you? In other words, you may be fond of and have affection for some and not for others. Now, is this the way charity works? No. For a Christian is expected to be charitable toward everyone, not just toward some. Now, merely because you are fond of some people and have a great deal of affection for some people, and you really like certain people, this is neither a sin nor a virtue on your part. There is no reason to pat yourself on the back because you like a lot of people. It's just a fact. What we do about it, of course, can be good or bad, this liking for people or not liking for people. But in itself, it's neither a sin nor a virtue. It's not a virtue to like people, and believe it or not, it's not a sin to dislike people. That just happens to be the way some of us are. Some people are cold by temperament. Now, that is very unfortunate for them. But it is no more a sin than slow digestion. Truly. Now, we have a tendency, though, to evaluate people in different terms. We tend to like people who are warm, and we tend not to like people whom we perceive as cold. But the truth of the matter is, the person who is warm is not particularly virtuous. Certainly no more virtuous than a person who by temperament is cold. Because neither of them work to be the way they are. They are the way they are because of background, heredity, environment, the way their parents were, their family were, the values they had growing up. They were taught to be the strong, silent type, perhaps. Another was taught to be outgoing and effusive. One person was punished for expressing his feelings and so began to bottle them up. And so all of us come into this place in life, all of us come to a certain point with a certain kind of a temperament. And we tend to think in terms of it being good or better or virtuous to be warm and friendly and outgoing, and not virtuous to be a little bit withdrawn or shy or retiring or introspective. But neither of these is a virtue or a sin. Neither of them at all. What you do about them might come to be. Warm, gregarious, affectionate people are not necessarily better Christians than shy, distant, thoughtful, introspective people. You see, because for the most part, people are just doing what they like to do. Now, do you deserve any credit for doing what comes naturally to you? For doing what you like to do? You just love to be with people. And you're very gregarious. And you like to be involved in a lot of activities. And so you just get in and you're going all over the place and doing what you absolutely love to do. And what you love to do just happens to be going by and visiting somebody in the hospital and taking something along. Or getting together a bake sale and putting things together and raising money to help somebody out. And you really enjoy what you're doing. Do you really deserve a pat on the back for doing that? Then we could go a step further. Maybe you don't like to do it, but you do it anyway. Do you deserve a pat on the back for doing it? Well, Jesus said that when you have done all these things that are your duty to do, you say to yourself, well, I'm an unprofitable servant. I have only done what was my duty to do. And so, emotional people, outgoing people, active people are not necessarily more charitable than quiet, undemonstrative people, if they're just doing what comes naturally. It's not virtue, it's temperament. Now, taking this thing a step further, emotion will not lead to charity. Oh, not invariably. You cannot find charity by seeking it through emotion or through feeling. But charity will lead to affection. This is biblical. Love in the Christian sense is not really a matter of feelings, but a matter of the will. This, I think, is one of the most important things and perhaps one of the most overlooked things in all of Christian thought. And so many people spend so much of their life looking for and seeking for more love, and not in the human sense, but in the godly sense, and looking for it in their feelings and in their emotions. Not realizing that Christian love, agape, is not so much a matter of the emotions or the feelings, but a matter of the will, of a set of the mind, of a determination to do and to be a certain way. It is not really necessary. You really shouldn't worry, let's put it this way, about whether or not you love your neighbor. You should act as if you did. Because you see, if you sit around thinking to yourself about your neighbor, now, I don't know if I love my neighbor or not. Because frankly, the man isn't a very lovable person. And I'm not talking about my neighbor. I'm just drawing an example. This man beats his wife, stays out late, doesn't treat his children well. Frankly, in many ways, the man is a despicable character. And because of his attitude and the way he's lived his life, he's gotten himself fired from his job. And he richly deserved to be fired from his job. Oh no, that somebody wasn't mistreating him when they fired him. He needed to be fired for the way he was working and the way he was doing the things that he was doing. Now, I don't like the man. I don't like what he does. I don't like what he stands for, and I don't like what he's doing with it to his wife and to his children. But I must act as though I loved him. And I must help his wife. And I must help his children. And if necessary, I've got to help him. Because love is very long-suffering, and love is kind, and I must accept a state of my own will that I will to help this man. Has nothing to do with my feelings, has nothing to do with my emotions, or my likes, or my dislikes, but my will. Can you will to love your neighbor in that way? You bet you can. You bet you can. Now let me ask you another question. Suppose for a moment that God's love for you were dependent upon emotions and feelings. Because you see, feelings have a great deal to do with the interaction that takes place between us. Now you love your children, don't you? But if your children can get really obstreperous, really rebellious, and really cut contrary to the things that you've told them to do, there can be times when you don't like your children just real well at the moment, can't there? There are times when your feelings toward your children, your own flesh and blood, can go up and down like a roller coaster, can't they? Supposing God's feelings toward you went up and down based upon how rebellious you were, how obedient you were, how faithful you were, how responsive you were, how unresponsive, I wouldn't like that very much. But you see, God's love toward you does not depend on the roller coaster of feelings. It is a matter of will, that God wills to love you. But this love is something different from that affection or feeling or emotion that kind of comes and goes with many of us from time to time. This is something at a considerably higher level than feelings. Now, I don't want to suggest for a moment that feelings are not important to us as human beings. They are. I'm afraid in many cases we charge off after them with such vigor that we fail to have the faintest idea of where we're going or why we're going there. Don't worry about whether you love your neighbor, first of all. Just act, behave as if you did. Because if you behave as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love him. I didn't say you'd like him. That's different. I didn't say you'd have an affection toward him. That's another matter entirely. But if you behave as though you love him, you will come to love him. Now, have you ever thought to yourself when you were upset with somebody, you disliked somebody, or somebody had done you wrong, that if I could just get even with it, if I could just hurt him, then I would feel better about it, and I would feel better, and I'd get this all out of my system, and I would be able to feel all right toward this person again? Do you ever feel that way, or ever think that, or ever imagine that that might be true? Or maybe you never allowed yourself to get to thinking that far. But you know, it really doesn't work that way. What generally happens is when you hurt someone you dislike him even more. When you get even with somebody that you hate, your hatred will become even deeper than it was before. But the funny thing is that if you turn around and find somebody you dislike, somebody that has hurt you, and you do him a good turn, strangely, you find yourself disliking him less, don't you? Now, I don't know how many times you've had a chance to do that in your life. It's not, I don't feel personally that I have that many enemies to where I can actually turn around and do good to those that hate me, or I can do good to my enemies, but there have been a few times in my life where I've been able to do that. And the funny thing about it is I find myself disliking the person less when I have done good to him, to somebody I didn't like. Have you found that? Now, if that's the case, then it naturally follows and stands to reason that if I go and do the opposite and I try to hurt this person, I'm going to dislike him more. Otherwise, you're left with a situation that no matter what I do, whether I hurt him or whether I help him, gradually I'm going to like him better. It just doesn't work that way. The way it works is that if you hurt a person, you tend not to like them as much. That is, if you hurt them on purpose. And if you do him a good turn, you're going to tend to like him more. A worldly person treats people kindly because he likes them. Now, if you treat people kindly because you like them, do you deserve a pat on the back? I don't know why you would, or why any of us would think we did. But the Christian tries to treat everyone kindly and finds himself liking more and more people. Now let's just take a look in the Scriptures for a moment and just sort of underline this in our minds. Turn back to Romans, if you would, to the 12th chapter. Romans chapter 12, and see if we can get clear in our minds what it is we're supposed to do on this love matter. Romans 12 and verse 14. Bless them that persecute you. Bless and curse not. Now, for years and years in my life, I don't think I ever had a soul that persecuted me or said anything bad about me. Now, in more recent years, I've had a few people say some bad things about me behind my back to other people. And before you realize what you're doing in many cases, you wind up getting cynical, and you start talking bad about them in turn, and you reply in kind without even realizing that that's what you're doing. It is so easy to do, and it even feels good. But what's the result of it? Does it heal the breach? Does it give you more love? Having responded with anger to persecution, do you now feel more kindly disposed toward the person? Of course not. But the clear instructions in your Bible are, bless them that persecute you, bless and curse not. He goes on with several things that are required of us that we are to be doing along the way, and he says, therefore, actually beginning in verse 9, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, you shall heap coals of fire on his head. So that even if your motive is to hurt him, the best way to do it is to feed him if he's hungry. And the best way to hurt him is to give him something to drink if he's thirsty. Because you'll cause him a certain amount of pain and anguish and discomfort when you do that, without adding any of your own, without causing yourself to hate him more. And you can actually reach his heart and his mind. You can actually smite his conscience far more severely by doing good to him, and at the same time lessen your own pain and your own hatred and your own dislike. Because all this hatred and dislike and anger that you carry around towards some other person isn't hurting him. It's hurting you. Because you see, most of the time, when you carry around this bitterness, this anger, this hatred toward so-and-so, he doesn't have the faintest idea that every day of your life you're getting on your knees before God and praying that God would smite him hip and thigh. He doesn't know that. He's going his life. He's eating his breakfast every morning and having his cup of coffee and going off whistling to work. He's cashing his paycheck at the end of the week and going down the store and buying those ribs. He's doing the things that he wants to do day in and day out while you're eating your heart out with anger, with envy, with frustration, with resentment. The more I think about it, the more stupid it looks to me. And the more I wonder why we as human beings allow ourselves I almost said that kind of luxury. But it's not a luxury. It's nothing but pain. And it's useless pain and fruitless pain. For it doesn't hurt your enemy. It hurts you. And what God tells you to do hurts your enemy and helps you. Funny, though, how hard it is to believe that simple little admonition. Turn back to the 6th chapter of Luke, if you will, for another reminder on the same subject. Luke, the 6th chapter, and verse 27. But I say unto you that hear, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you, and unto him that smites you on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that takes away your cloak, don't try to stop him, hand him your coat. Give to every man that asks of you, and of him that takes away your goods, don't try to even get them back. And as you would that men would do to you, do to them likewise. For if you love them that love you, what thank have you? Now you see this, here's exactly what I'm trying to say. Just because you love some people is not thankworthy. You don't deserve a pat on the back because of the affection that you have toward a dozen or 2 dozen or 100 people. What about all those people you don't like? What about all those people you don't have affection for? Do you dislove or not love those people? Well, then love and liking are two different things. Then charity, agape, is not a matter of emotion or feeling. For you've got a feeling toward all kinds of people, and you have emotions toward some people, but not toward too many people. So, agape and emotion or affection are not the same. They are quite different. Passing back a little further now to the 5th chapter of Matthew. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 43. You have heard it has been said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That's something most of us can live with. That's easy to do. That's, in fact, the way most human beings live their lives. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. Pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Now, I wouldn't do that, if it were me. If I had a couple of farmers out here, and one of them was a good man, the other was a bad man, I'd rain on a good man's property, and I'd send nothing but hail, lightning, drought, storm, and fire, and whatever else I had to do on that bad man's property. I just wouldn't do it that way. But you see, loving those that love me is one thing, and blessing those that love me is something. But there's no particular thankworthy thing involved in that. You see, if I'm going to be the son of my Father, I must love both men. And I must cause the sun to rise upon one as I do the other. And I must cause the rain to fall upon one as I do the other. There may find some way that I will bless the man that loves me, but I'm required to love both of them. Not love one and hate the other, not if I'm to be like God. For you see, God tells us that he loves us all, not some of us, and not some of us more than others. He loves us all. Agape is not a matter merely of feeling. It is a matter of the will. Now, of course, he mentioned this, you've heard it said of old time. Was he talking about the Old Testament? Were things different back then somehow? Interesting proverb back in Proverbs 25 and verse 21. If your enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. If he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For you shall heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord shall reward you. You ever hear that before? Sure you did. You just heard it in the New Testament. They didn't have a different way that God demanded, or different demands God made of mankind in the Old Testament from New. He expected the same sort of an attitude to be there. Back in Exodus 23 and verse 5, you'll find a very specific commandment. If your enemy's animal is fallen in the road or in the ditch, you're to go over and help your enemy. Get that animal out of the ditch and take him on his way. I guess one of the things I'm driving at in the sermon today is to warn everybody not to ever make the mistake of pursuing feelings in spiritual matters. I feel oftentimes that some people confuse emotional needs with spiritual needs, and they are not the same. Emotions in a human being are physical, not spiritual. Feelings, that shot of adrenaline that you get whenever you're afraid, that funny tingle that goes right on out to the ends of your fingers at that point in time, that raising of the hair on the back of your neck when you're afraid, this cold sweat that you break out into from time to time under certain stressful situations, this quickening of the pulse rate, this raising of the blood pressure, these things are all physical. All physical. They are connected with your emotions. They are oftentimes dealt with by your emotions, and they all have to do with the mental, physical, emotional makeup of a human being, and not a one of them has anything to do with the spiritual. Not directly. Now, you see, what happens to some of us from time to time is that having lived in a world and a society where you would get the feeling almost that there was a conspiracy to try to drum every kind of emotion out of us. To get us to where we had no feelings and to where we couldn't respond to one another. I remember whenever I was just a little boy, how that I would pick up a stray dog and take it home with me. I remember once hiding behind the door with this little stray puppy in my hand because I was afraid when my mother saw me with the dog, she's going to make me take the dog away or do something else with it. So I was hiding from her with this little puppy I had brought home. Well, fortunately, my mother was as soft-hearted as I was, and we kept the dog about 12 years before that dog finally got run over by a car. but which seems to be the end of an awful lot of dogs. But I was so moved by that. Then there was a time when I was about 30-ish, and I was back visiting in the same general neck of the woods again, my grandmother's home, and a dog came by, and I got the broom out, and I chased that dog off, and I found myself, get out of here, dog, and I walked back to the porch, and when I walked up on the porch, my heart smote me, and I thought, how have I changed? How have I changed? For there was a time when I would have felt so much pity, and now I feel no pity for the animal whatsoever. Why has this change taken place in me? I thought about that for a long time. And I thought about all the movies I've seen where I was taught to hate the bad person, where I was brought up to a fever pitch through the whole movie to where I would stand on my feet with the rest of the crowd and cheer when the bad guy got it, in the end of the movie, and they destroyed him, shot him full of holes and blood spouting all over the place. We're all through movies and in school, and the peer pressure and everything around us tends to make us afraid to express emotions, and so we kind of put them all on the back burner, and we calm everything down, and we live through our lives sometimes getting to the place to where we're just crying out for some feeling. I want to feel something. I want something to happen down inside of me when I come into contact with something. And we're so struggling with this so much of our lives. And now really many people in the world are beginning to react against the loss of feeling and are looking and searching somehow. I want to feel something. And so consequently we get on our knees before God, or we begin to pray, or we try to live our Christian life and get frustrated because we're still not feeling anything. And get confused about what it is that we're looking for. And so we might go off and try some church that seems to have a lot of feeling. They sing their hymns in a certain way, and they dance around in the aisles, and the preacher will even dance up back and forth on the stage, and he'll shout, and he'll get red, and the sweat will come rolling off his face, and he'll scream about twisting the old devil's tail, and we feel something while we're there. But what we're feeling is physical. How do I know that? Because a couple of hours later, it's all gone. And you're out at a restaurant with some friends having a piece of apple pie and coffee and sitting around chatting and telling a few jokes from time to time and laughing and enjoying life. And you're not feeling now what you were feeling there. Now, we are told specifically about 1 Corinthians 13 about agape or love. Charity never fails. You cannot maintain the high that you get from some type of emotional responses, either in religion, or in bed with someone you love, or excitement at a performance that you've given on a stage, or whatever it is. You cannot maintain that high 24 hours a day, or it will kill you. And in fact, it seems where we human beings are concerned, that the higher the highs, the lower the lows. And an awful lot of times after you've experienced one of these big, great highs and these tremendous emotional experiences, and you get away from whatever it was where the experience was there, you go into a fit of the blackest depression you've ever experienced in your life. And I think many of you probably have experienced some little minor aspects of this in coming home from the Feast of Tabernacles. When you got lifted up by some sermons and you were very inspired by the sermons and you felt really encouraging. You really did feel something, and you had tears running down your eyes when you left because of the warmth and affection you feel for all these people that share the same thoughts and the ideas and the hopes and the dreams and the fears and the frustrations that you feel. And you get halfway home all by yourself, and maybe get frustrated at a few odds and ends that happen, like a flat tire, and maybe your car breaks down or one thing other goes wrong. Or you get back home and you go to work, and it's just like it was when you left. Hadn't changed a bit. The foreman is still there. You're still working the same hours for the same rotten pay, still taking home, barely enough to keep ends together, and your wife is still having to think about going out to work. And you sit down in a chair one night, and the old tears run down your face, and you think, is this ever going to get any better? Pursuing feeling in spiritual matters is a dead-end street. It's a dead-end street. You'll run all the way down there, and when you get to the end of it, you're going to find there's nothing there. You just had the fun and the feeling along the way, but you can't keep it there. I've often been fascinated by the fact that you can wander through a rose garden, and you can take a beautiful rose, and you can hold it up to your nose and deep breathe very deeply once, and twice, and 3 times, and very shortly, you can no longer smell the rose. Now, this is the way human beings are made. This is a part of the structure of our being. And it's true of virtually every sensory sensation that we have, that there comes a place to where the continued exposure of a given sense, too much, not even too much, but just any of it, over any prolonged period of time, and the effect of the sensation becomes less and less and less. Back rub can feel real good when it starts out, but if it goes on long enough, it can actually become irritating and even painful. If a person just stays with something that you enjoyed and it felt good and that you really liked. You see, emotions and feelings and excitement all will let you down. They're all physical. They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. And even the affection you feel for other people and they feel for you will let you down. But those affections come and those affections go, and they're so dependent upon physical things and physical responses and physical relationships. Now you put all this together and you come back to 1 Corinthians 13 and it says, charity never fails. I think I have to respect the King James translator's decision not to translate that word as love. Because over the years, in listening to the sermons and the sermonettes that I've heard on love, and thinking about my own responses, because of the word love, I think in many times we are looking for the wrong thing, and something which the Holy Spirit was not conveying when Paul used the word agape. For it is not the same as phileo, which is the affectionate love that two human beings may experience for one another. Quite a different matter. Christian love, charity, never fails. Therefore, it is something different from emotions and from feelings. I think a lot of people worry because they don't find a feeling of love toward God in themselves. I suspect that many of us have been in this category, not that it's anything we dwell on hours and hours out of every day. But we worry a little bit, and it's a little bit of a nagging concern of ours that sometimes we may feel that there are other people that love God more than I do. And I just don't feel right. And then comes the time when you lose someone that's very close to you, or a child is hit in an automobile accident, and that child was either yours or a very close friend's, and you see the bitterness and even the anger that begins to rise up in a person's heart toward God. How could he allow this? How could this happen? This isn't God's world. And some people even come to the place of even wondering whether there isn't any God. But anger, real sharp anger toward God, experienced by people in that kind of a circumstance along the way. And then comes the guilt, because they know they should not feel that way toward God. But they don't understand that this is a feeling, and it will pass. Anger is an emotion, and it can't last. It can't endure. A lot of people spend a great deal of their lives trying to whip that anger back up again, and they get mad at themselves because they find their anger toward someone beginning to fade away and no longer feeling as angry. But anger will pass. Fear will pass. Affection can even pass. But charity can't fail. Never. Ask yourself this question. If I were sure that I loved God, what would I do? What would I do? What things, what decisions would I make? When you have found the answer, go and do it. Because you see, Christian love is an affair not of the feelings, but of the will. If you understand what one who loves God will do, you have but to will to do it. Now, what you're going to find as a result of this is that God will give you feelings of love when he pleases, and how he pleases, and when he's ready. You can't create them. You cannot demand them as a right. There is one thing, however, that is open to you, and that is to say, if I were sure I loved God, what would I do? And when you have answered the question, you go and do it. But to me in all this, perhaps the most important thing that I have learned is that God's love for me God's charity toward me, the word agape, is not a feeling that comes and goes with him. It is a will that stays and that absolutely will never fail. Feelings may come. Feelings may go. But God's charity toward you stays.